everyone. I'm Liane Jackson, senior law editor at Forbes. It has been a monumental legal week, and today is one of the biggest cases of all, the sentencing of President-elect Donald Trump in his state case in New York for falsifying business records. He's before Judge Juan Merchan. And we have our legal analyst, Jon Jorge Aras, here joining us, the founder of Aras Law. And he's going to break down a little bit about what happened and what comes next for the president-elect. Jon Jorge, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. So today I had the opportunity to watch the hearing and see what was happening with President Trump. And in this matter today, he was sentenced. He attempted through his counsel to try to block this and to try to delay it through the Supreme Court, which denied his request to do that. So today was the sentencing where essentially President Trump was giving what's called an unconditional discharge, which really means that he's not facing any sort of criminal ongoing probation or any sort of sentence connected to any jail time. It's basically the end of the case. Juan Merchan is the judge that put it into place. And President Trump did have an opportunity to speak today at the hearing, and he echoed his position that he thought that this case was ill-conceived and that he was innocent of the allegations lodged against him. And his attorney also echoed that they were likely going to appeal this case. So while it's the end of it today, in terms of the unconditional discharge and Juan Merchan's ruling, I do suspect that we'll likely hear something about this case in the future through an appeal.
Yeah, Trump's team has indicated that they intend to appeal. This is something he has tried to appeal, delaying this sentencing to begin with till either after his inauguration or just indefinitely. However, the appeals court in New York denied his application to stay, and the Supreme Court, interestingly, also denied any application yesterday. They denied an application to stay the sentencing, and I'd just like to discuss the breakdown of the justices' decision on that. Four of them said that they would have heard his application, whereas five justices decided against it. And partly, as you mentioned, the unconditional discharge, there's really no punishment other than a criminal conviction, the first conviction of a sitting president, former or current president in the United States. So that is something that clearly Trump does not want on his record. However, the justices, can you talk about the breakdown of, are you surprised at all that they decided not to stay his application or stay his sentencing, or even to hear the application and the breakdown of the justices on that?
So it was broken down in 5-4. The court was almost evenly split. I think what tipped the court is to what you were alluding to earlier, is that the Supreme Court knew that there was going to be an unconditional discharge. So they knew that this wasn't going to result in any sort of actual sentence for President Trump. And I think that that really underlined and made them come to the decision that they came to. We know that the Supreme Court does believe very strongly in the immunity and the breadth of presidential power and what a president can be prosecuted for and what they can't be prosecuted for. They have a wide scope of that. So I wasn't surprised to see the court be close on this issue, but I really think this came more down to procedure, less so a substantive question of law, whether or not he could be, convicted of this sort of act. I think for them, it was move this thing forward. And they also realize, most likely, that President Trump is going to appeal this decision, right? He's going to appeal the ruling from the state court and try to find a way to, like you said, protect his reputation and not have that mark as being the only sitting president to have a felony conviction.
Yes, and just to remind our viewers, because there's a number of cases circulating still against President-elect, and this was which we'll talk about in a minute, but this was the case, the New York State case, where Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg had charged Trump in March 2023 with 34 counts of falsifying business records to cover up payments to adult film actress Stormy Daniels after to buy her silence before the 2016 election after they had an affair, which Trump has denied. But he was found guilty of all 34 counts in May. And since then, he has tried to stay any sentencing. He has stated that he is going to appeal. But Jon Jorge, there are other criminal indictments out there against the president-elect. Can you tell us a little bit about the status of those? I mean, first off, Jack Smith, his indictments have been dismissed, but where they stand in terms of what we know about those cases and what happened.
Yeah. So after President Trump or President-elect Trump was won the election, Jack Smith had voluntarily stepped into court and withdrawn these cases against President Trump. There are some parts of the case that are ongoing related to the classified documents case. There are still two defendants in that case that are being sued or indicted by the Department of Justice, and that case will continue to go forward. And the other case, the election interference case against President Trump, that's gone for him. However, there is a report now. Jack Smith obviously did a lot of work leading up to these indictments, did a lot of investigation, and the Attorney General Merrick Garland has said that before he's done, before he leaves on January 20th, he is going to get these reports out. So the one report is related to the January 6th alleged insurrection by President Trump, excuse me. And then the other one is the documents case, the classified documents case. What looks like what's going to happen is that the case involving the insurrection that report will be released. However, when it comes to the classified documents case, it doesn't look like that's going to be released right now because that case is ongoing. There's still defendants in that case. So they would be prejudiced maybe by a report coming out. But that's really where it lies with Jack Smith now. It's pretty much at the end. And here we go. Here's essentially a final report on it that'll be submitted to Congress and then possibly disseminated to the public from there.
If it is disseminated, that will definitely generate a lot of interest. So we will see how long that takes and if it does happen. And the Judge Cannon case in Florida, the classified documents case, the judge has been very activist or proactive to help Trump's side. At least a lot of experts have noticed and have opined that she has done a lot to block and prevent that case from going forward. And this is sort of the latest salvo against Jack Smith, the prosecutor. They butted heads on a lot of ways. And
Sure.
can you talk a little bit about whether she does have the authority? She's blocked his release. He planned to release, as you said, the
Mm.
classified documents as well as the election interference. She has blocked the
Mm.
release of the classified documents. There are still other defendants in that case, as you mentioned. However, there are questions of separation of powers. Does she have the authority to block the Justice Department or the executive branch from doing something that might be narrowly tailored?
It's an interesting question. As a matter of fact, she has, right? So in this moment, she actually has done it, but it's a limited stay, and they appealed. Jack Smith appealed it immediately, and I believe is going to the 11th Circuit. Just trying to get that document to be able to put out to the public and have it redacted potentially to avoid any sort of facts that would hinge on the current defendants that are in place. And also, I believe that Judge Cannon in that case, what's being challenged now by those current defendants in the classified documents case is that Jack Smith was unconstitutionally appointed. That's a part of this too. So obviously it's within the judge's purview to be able to hear this. However, this judge is not the final arbiter, right? We have the 11th Circuit, we have Circuit Court, and then we have the Supreme Court. Jack Smith has stated that he's going to continue on with these cases. Now, when January 20th comes and President Trump is inaugurated, will that be the case? I'm not sure. We won't know if these cases will actually continue or not. But that's the status of where things are now. If you look at this globally, President Trump's legal strategy from the beginning to when he got elected turned out to actually be fairly effective in delaying the cases, finding ways to appeal, finding ways to get him to that date, to November. And now the landscape as we see it has been really completely changed.
Yes, as many people have referred to President Ronald Reagan as the Teflon president, but in this case, Trump has escaped several criminal cases. He, through delay, has managed to push back and avoid any type of, I mean, he did have a civil lawsuit, but in terms of the criminal cases, what remains is the state court case in Georgia, which is up in the air. The lead prosecutor was disqualified by a court in December. That is being appealed, but that is the only criminal case against the
Mhm.
president-elect that remains. Is that correct, John George?
I believe so. In that case, I mean, just from the standpoint of the prosecution, it's pretty disastrous now. I mean, it's become rudderless, and they're now fighting to just, in the same way that Jack Smith was fighting to just be able to proceed with the case, they're having the same issues now. So it's another case that remains to be seen whether it will continue or not. I mean, the Supreme Court's ruling was very strong that now sitting as president, now that Donald Trump is president, I imagine that he's not going to have to face any sort of trial or any sort of hearing or anything of that nature while he's the president of the United States. He has strong immunity at this point.
Yeah, he has managed to immunize himself through strategy, and of course the judges who have been ruling in his favor. He has definitely been successful in
Yep.
that regard. And Bragg's District Attorney Bragg's case is the only one to reach trial. It might have been sort of the case that people didn't give a lot of credit to. What do you think that Alvin Bragg, the one case that stuck, the one case that went forward, how will history look at this whole scenario with all these federal cases, with a really strong state court
Sure.
case in Georgia that for election interference that ultimately fell apart?
It is very interesting to think about that the federal cases and the Georgia case, they had a bigger, more fleshed out story. And in terms of seriousness and what we were talking about, integrity of elections, democracy, we're talking about retaining classified documents. The Stormy Daniels case, for lack of a better word, calling it that, was sort of the more salacious case, sort of like the tabloid case, something that you would just see on, like, you're checking out at the grocery store and you see this tabloid of this is what's going on here. It is, looking back on it, Alvin Bragg seemed to question whether or not he was going to go through with it, finally decided to go through with it. And it is somewhat ironic that this is the case that ended up going to a hearing, especially involving Michael Cohen and just the whole cast of characters involved in this. And then all the other cases that had, you know, FBI, they had huge investigations, they had the Department of Justice, sort of fell by the wayside. I think we'll look back on it in history, and it's almost a little bit of a head scratcher to say, how did this one end up there? And how did the other ones totally fall apart? But I think you do have to credit President Trump's defense team. They were effective in their approach. However it played out, they were effective in pushing off these other cases, and they were almost effective in pushing off the sentencing for this case, and they're going to appeal it. So they, for whatever their strategy was, getting President Trump to election day and getting the payoff of actually being elected, because if this doesn't happen, right, if he doesn't get elected, then it's a different story as well. These things could easily continue, right? So that was really the payoff of all of it. They were effective in doing it, although they couldn't stop this one case from Alvin Bragg. But yeah, that's the only one that really went through.
Yeah, from his legal team standpoint, where opportunity and luck met preparation, has succeeded for President-elect Trump, who will be inaugurated in a couple of weeks or less, actually. But today he was sentenced to an unconditional discharge by Judge Juan Merchan in New York court, and he will be the first sitting president to have a criminal sentence on his record. But we will. It's been a head scratcher of a few years anyway, in general. So as you said, a head scratcher how this all played out, but this is what we have this afternoon. Thank you so much, John George, for breaking down all these cases, what's happening, what's happened, what's going to potentially happen in the future, and I look forward to speaking with you again about all of this, all these legal cases and
I
issues.
look forward to it. Yeah, thank you so much.